The vote wasn't even close. 3,742 civilizations in favor, 0 against, with Earth abstaining because nobody bothered to ask their opinion. The Galactic Council had spoken, and their message was crystal clear. Humanity was a problem that needed to disappear. Captain Sarah Chun stood in the observation deck of the orbital station, watching the last of the alien delegates' ships vanish into hyperspace. The emptiness they left behind felt heavier than the vacuum of space itself. For the first time in 2 centuries, Earth was truly alone. No trade routes, no diplomatic channels, no emergency assistance protocols. The galaxy had voted them into exile, and they'd done it with the casual indifference of someone swatting a fly. The charges had been predictable enough. Humanity was too aggressive, too unpredictable, too willing to bend the sacred rules that had governed galactic civilization for millennia. They pointed to human mercenary companies who'd started accepting contracts that other species wouldn't touch. They highlighted Earth's refusal to limit their military expansion after the Proxima incident. Most damning of all, they'd cited humanity's disturbing tendency to survive situations that should have killed them outright. The irony wasn't lost on Chun. The same traits that made humans valuable allies in desperate times had ultimately marked them as threats in peaceful ones. When a galaxy was stable and secure, nobody wanted neighbors who treated impossible odds as minor inconveniences. Admiral Rodriguez materialized on the holographic projector, his weathered face grim with determination. The old soldier had been fighting one battle or another for 40 years, but Chun had never seen him look quite like this. There was something new in his eyes, something that hadn't been there during the corporate wars or the colonial uprisings. It took her a moment to recognize it as excitement. "Captain, we need to talk," he said without preamble. "Emergency session, all department heads. The council thinks they've solved their human problem by cutting us off from the galaxy. They're about to learn why that was their first mistake." Chun felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the station's climate controls. She'd served under Rodriguez long enough to know that tone. It was the voice he used when he was about to do something that would either save everyone or get them all killed. Sometimes both. The galaxy had rules about everything. Faster-than-light travel required approved navigation charts. Weapons development was strictly regulated by technology treaties. Even basic manufacturing was subject to resource allocation quotas enforced by the Trade Federation. For 200 years, humanity had played by those rules, accepting limitations that felt increasingly arbitrary and restrictive. But Exile changed everything. Outside the Galactic Council's jurisdiction, those rules became nothing more than suggestions. And humans had never been particularly good at following suggestions. Chun made her way to the briefing room, passing through corridors that should have felt familiar after 3 years stationed here. Instead, everything seemed different now. The same walls, the same viewports, the same humming machinery, but all of it transformed by the knowledge that they were no longer part of something larger. They were on their own, in the most complete sense of the phrase. The briefing room was already crowded when she arrived. Department heads from engineering, tactical, intelligence, and communications filled the chairs around the central table. Dr. Williams from the research division looked pale but determined. Commander Torres from Special Operations was cleaning his fingernails with a knife, which was never a good sign. Even the civilian contractors were there, their usual easy confidence replaced by something harder and more focused. Rodriguez waited until everyone was seated before activating the central display. What appeared wasn't a star chart or a tactical analysis. It was a simple document, dense with legal text and bearing the official seal of the Galactic Council. "This," Rodriguez said, "is the formal notice of our exile. 3 pages of diplomatic language that essentially boils down to go away and don't come back. The Council voted to expel us from galactic civilization, effective immediately. No appeals process, no grace period, no second chances." The room was quiet enough to hear the station's life support system cycling. Chun could feel the weight of history settling on their shoulders. This was the moment that would define humanity's future, one way or another. Rodriguez smiled. and Chen realized she'd been wrong about the expression in his eyes. It wasn't excitement she'd seen. It was anticipation. Now, the Admiral continued, let me show you what we're going to do about it. The display changed, and Chen's breath caught her throat. Because what Rodriguez was showing them wasn't a surrender. It wasn't even a plan for survival. It was a declaration of war against the very concept of limitation itself. The holographic display shifted to show something that made several people in the room lean forward in their chairs. Dr. Williams was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. Is that what I think it is? Rodriguez nodded grimly. Project Prometheus. We've been working on it for 6 years, ever since the Council started making noise about human overreach in the outer systems. They thought they were giving us a timeout. What they actually did was remove the only thing keeping us from finishing what we started. Chun stared at the technical specifications floating in front of her. She'd heard rumors about black budget projects, whispered conversations between senior officers that stopped whenever junior personnel entered the room. But seeing it laid out like this, with actual blueprints and test data, made her stomach clench with a mixture of fear and pride. The gravity manipulation technology alone would have violated at least 30 different Council treaties. The weapon systems were 3 generations beyond anything the galaxy had seen in combat. And the propulsion method didn't just ignore the established faster-than-light protocols. It made them completely obsolete. How long have we been breaking their rules? Asked Commander Torres, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Longer than most of you have been alive, Rodriguez replied. The Council likes to think they've been managing galactic civilization for the past 5,000 years. What they don't realize is that they've been managing stagnation. Real innovation stopped the moment they decided that stability was more important than progress. Chen thought back to her academy training, remembering lectures about the great peace that had settled over the galaxy after the formation of the Council. War had become almost unthinkable between member species. Resources were allocated efficiently through bureaucratic channels. Technology advanced at a steady, predictable pace that ensured no single civilization gained too much of an advantage over the others. It had been peaceful. It had been fair. And according to every human scientist who'd ever chafed under Council oversight, it had been slowly killing the galaxy's potential for growth. The Altarians figured it out first, continued Rodriguez. About 15 years ago, their deep space monitoring stations started picking up energy signatures that didn't match any known technology. Signatures that were growing stronger and more frequent. Something was out there beyond the edge of Council space, and it wasn't bound by their precious limitations. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Chen had studied xenobiology and galactic politics, but she'd never heard anything about unknown civilizations in the void between galaxies. The Council's official position was that their surveys had been comprehensive, that all major spacefaring races had been contacted and integrated into the galactic community. The Council buried the reports, Rodriguez said, classified them so deep that most of their own members never heard about them. But they started getting nervous, started looking for someone to blame if things went wrong. And humans made perfect scapegoats. Dr. Williams was scrolling through data on her personal tablet, her face growing paler by the minute. These energy readings, they're not just advanced technology. They're showing capabilities that shouldn't be possible under our current understanding of physics. Whoever's out there, they're not playing by the same rules we are. Torres stopped cleaning his knife and looked up sharply. So, the Council kicks us out, right, when we might actually need to defend ourselves? That's either incredibly bad timing or incredibly convenient. There's no such thing as coincidence in galactic politics, Rodriguez said. The Council knows something is coming. They've known for years, and they've decided that the best way to handle it is to maintain their perfect little society while sacrificing the one species that might actually be willing to fight. Chun felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. The increased military patrols in the outer systems over the past 5 years. The sudden interest in human combat doctrines from species that had previously considered warfare barbaric. The mysterious reassignment of several prominent human officers to classified research positions that no one ever talked about. They've been using us, she said, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. All this time, they've been letting us develop weapons and tactics that were too civilized to create themselves. And now that they think they might need them, they're cutting us loose so their hands stay clean. Rodriguez's smile was sharp enough to cut steel. That's exactly what they've done. They wanted us to be their attack dogs, ready to unleash when the real threats showed up. But they made one critical error in their calculations. The Admiral touched a control, and the display changed again. This time it showed star charts extending far beyond the traditional boundaries of Council space. Red markers indicated anomalous energy signatures, growing stronger and more concentrated as they approached the galactic rim. They assumed we'd come running back the moment they needed us. They thought Exile was just a temporary measure, a way to keep us isolated until the crisis passed. What they don't understand is that humans don't forgive, and we sure as hell don't forget. Chun looked around the room at the faces of her colleagues. She saw anger there and determination, but also something else. Something that reminded her of the old stories her grandfather used to tell about the early colonial days, when human settlers had to survive on worlds that seemed determined to kill them. They looked ready for a war that hadn't started yet. Rodriguez waited for the weight of his words to settle before continuing. We have exactly 72 hours before the Council's exile order goes into full effect. After that, every human ship, station, and colony outside the Sol system becomes fair game for seizure. They're planning to strip us of everything we've built in the outer territories. Chen's hands clenched into fists. The research stations around Proxima Centauri alone represented decades of work and trillions of credits. The mining operations in the asteroid belt were feeding half the colonies in human space. And the military installations scattered throughout the frontier systems weren't just strategic assets. They were home to thousands of families who'd spent their entire lives in service to humanity. "What about the civilians?" asked Dr. Williams. "There are nearly 1 million humans living in Council territory. They can't just abandon their lives overnight. The Council has graciously offered them a choice," Rodriguez said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Renounce their human citizenship and swear loyalty to their local planetary government, or book passage back to Earth within the next month. Either way, they're cutting all ties with us." Torres slammed his knife into the table hard enough to make everyone jump. "So we're supposed to just roll over and let them carve us up? Hand over everything we've worked for and slink back home with our tails between our legs?" "That's exactly what they expect us to do," Rodriguez replied. "The Council's xenopsychology experts have studied human behavior patterns for centuries. They know we're emotional, impulsive, prone to making decisions based on pride rather than logic. They're counting on us to either surrender quietly or lash out ineffectively and give them an excuse to use force." The Admiral's fingers danced across the holographic controls, bringing up a new display that made Chen's breath catch in her throat. It was a tactical overview of Council space, showing the positions of every major fleet, defensive installation, and strategic resource depot. But what made her pulse quicken were the small blue markers scattered throughout the display, markers that could only represent human assets. "For 6 years, we've been preparing for this day," Rodriguez said quietly. "Not because we wanted war, but because we knew it was inevitable. The Council could never tolerate a species that refused to accept their limitations. So we made sure that when they finally moved against us, we'd be ready." Chen studied the display more carefully, her tactical training kicking in despite her shock. The blue markers weren't randomly scattered. They formed a pattern, a web of interconnected positions that could either be a communication network or something far more dangerous. "Those aren't just observation posts," she said, her voice barely steady. "No, they're not," Rodriguez confirmed. "Every human merchant vessel, every research team, every diplomatic mission we've sent into Council territory over the past 6 years has been carrying more than just their official cargo. We've been seeding their space with technology they don't even know exists." Dr. Williams was frantically scrolling through data streams on her tablet, her face growing paler by the second. "The quantum resonance signatures, you've been building a network. A galaxy-spanning network that could shut down every piece of Council technology simultaneously, Rodriguez finished. Their ships, their weapons, their communications, their life support systems. Everything they've built relies on the same standardized technology base they've been forcing on member species for millennia. And we spent the last 6 years figuring out how to turn it off. The room erupted in voices as the full scope of the plan became clear. Chun felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down into an abyss she couldn't see the bottom of. What Rodriguez was describing wasn't just an act of war. It was the complete destabilization of galactic civilization. The casualties alone would be in the billions, Williams protested. Ships stranded in deep space, planets losing their defense grids, medical facilities going dark. We'd be killing innocent people across half the galaxy. And if we do nothing, how many humans die when the Council decides we're too dangerous to exist? Torres shot back. They're not giving us a choice here, document. They've made it clear that there's no place for us in their perfect little galaxy. Rodriguez held up a hand for silence. There's more. The energy signatures the Altarians detected, they're not random. Our analysis shows they're moving in coordinated patterns, following vector paths that will bring them into contact with the Outer Rim colonies within the next 18 months. Whatever's out there, it's not just advanced, it's organized. A new hologram appeared above the table, showing the edge of galactic space where known civilization faded into the cosmic void. Red markers moved in slow, deliberate formations, each one representing an energy signature that dwarfed anything in the Council's arsenal. The Council knows this is coming, Rodriguez continued. Their response has been to consolidate their defenses around the core worlds and hope the outer territories can buy them enough time to prepare. They're willing to sacrifice billions of colonists to protect their precious inner systems. Chin stared at the approaching markers and felt something cold settle in her stomach. They're using the Exile as cover. While everyone's focused on the human problem, they're quietly writing off everything beyond the midrim, making it look like a political decision instead of an admission that they can't protect their own people. Exactly. And when those things reach inhabited space, guess who they'll encounter first? Human colonies, human outposts, human exploration fleets. We're going to be the galaxy's early warning system, whether we like it or not. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Chun could see the terrible logic of it all, the way the Council had maneuvered them into an impossible position. Fight back against the Exile and be branded as terrorists. Accept it quietly and become expendable shields for the very civilization that had cast them out. Rodriguez's expression was grim as he prepared to reveal the final piece of the puzzle. In 18 hours, the Council fleet will arrive to begin enforcement of the Exile Order. They're bringing everything they have, 600 ships, enough firepower to sterilize a dozen worlds. They want to make sure we understand exactly how serious they are about removing us from galactic affairs. Torres grinned with predatory anticipation. Let them come. We've got a few surprises waiting for them. The question, Rodriguez said, his finger hovering over a control that would change everything, is whether we're willing to cross a line we can never come back from. Once we activate this network, once we prove that we can bring their entire civilization to its knees, there's no pretending we're still the same species that begged for membership in their council 2 centuries ago. Chun looked around the room one final time, seeing the faces of people who had already made their choice. They were past the point of diplomatic solutions, past the hope of peaceful coexistence. The galaxy had voted them into exile, and now they were about to discover what humanity looked like when it stopped playing by anyone else's rules. Rodriguez's hand moved toward the activation control, and Chun held her breath. The proximity alarms screamed to life before he could reach it. Emergency lighting bathed the briefing room in pulsing red as the station's AI announced in its maddeningly calm voice. Unscheduled hyperspace emergence detected. Multiple contacts. Distance, 200,000 kilometers, and closing. Chen's training kicked in instantly. That's impossible. The Council fleet isn't supposed to arrive for another 18 hours. She was already moving toward the tactical displays, her fingers flying over the sensor controls. What she saw made her blood turn to ice. "Admiral," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos erupting around them, "you need to see this." The holographic display shifted to show the space around their station. Instead of the expected Council warships, 12 vessels hung in the void like metallic nightmares. Their hulls were black as the space between stars, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. No energy signatures, no communication arrays, no design elements that matched anything in the galactic databases. "Those aren't Council ships," whispered Dr. Williams. "They're not anyone's ships." Torres was already reaching for his sidearm, a gesture that would have been laughable under normal circumstances. What good was a pistol against vessels that had just appeared from nowhere? But Chen understood the impulse. When faced with the impossible, humans reached for weapons. Rodriguez stared at the display with the expression of a man watching his carefully laid plans crumble in real time. The timeline was wrong. Our intelligence said 18 months. It was supposed to be 18 months. The station shuddered as something passed through its shields without triggering any defensive systems. Chun felt her skin crawl as she realized the implications. Whatever technology these intruders possessed, it operated on principles that made Council science look primitive. And that meant every assumption they'd made about defending human space had just become worthless. "Sir," came a voice from the communication station. "We're receiving a transmission. It's addressing you by name." The main display flickered, static dancing across its surface before resolving into an image that made everyone in the room take an involuntary step backward. The figure looking back at them was humanoid, but wrong in ways that set off every evolutionary alarm humanity had developed over millions of years. Its skin had the translucent quality of deep-sea creatures, revealing networks of veins that pulsed with bioluminescent light. But it was the eyes that truly unsettled Chun, ancient beyond measure, filled with an intelligence that seemed to encompass eons of experience. "Admiral Rodriguez," the creature said, its voice carrying harmonics the human vocal cords couldn't produce. "We have been watching your species with great interest. Your exile from the Galactic Council has created opportunities." Rodriguez found his voice, though Chun could see the effort it took. "Who are you? What do you want?" "We are what remains of the predecessors. We ruled this galaxy long before your council existed, before any of the current member species had even discovered fire. We withdrew to the void between galaxies not out of defeat, but out of boredom. Your kind, however, has proven entertaining." The implications hit Chun like a physical blow. The predecessors were myths, legends that some of the older council species whispered about in their historical archives. Beings of such advanced capability that they had transcended the need for physical matter, becoming pure energy that could reshape reality at will. If even half the stories were true, humanity was facing something that could snuff out their entire species without effort. "The Council believes they have solved their human problem through exile," the predecessor continued. "They do not realize they have merely selected the strongest specimens for our attention. We have need of a species that refuses to accept limitations, that thrives in impossible circumstances." Torres lowered his weapon, finally grasping the scope of what they were facing. "What kind of need?" The creature's expression might have been a smile, though on its alien features, it looked more like a predator baring its teeth. "The galaxy has grown stagnant under Council rule. 5,000 years of managed peace, controlled progress, artificial stability. It has become a laboratory rather than a living system. We intend to change that." Rodriguez's hand moved away from the activation control for their sabotage network. "And you want us to help you?" "Not help. Replace. The Council has outlived its usefulness, but destroying them directly would be inelegant. Far better to let their own prejudices accomplish their downfall. Your species will serve as the catalyst." Chun felt the room spinning around her as she processed what the predecessor was suggesting. "You're offering us power. In exchange for what?" "For being exactly what you are. The Council fears human unpredictability, your refusal to accept defeat, your tendency to find solutions where none should exist. We value these same traits. Under our guidance, humanity could become the dominant force in galactic affairs within a generation. The proximity alarms screamed again, and Chin's displays lit up with new contacts. The Council fleet had arrived early, emerging from hyperspace in perfect formation. 600 warships against 12 predecessor vessels and 1 human space station. Under normal circumstances, it would have been a massacre. But as Chun watched, the predecessor ships began to change. Their black hulls flowed like liquid, reshaping themselves into configurations that hurt to look at directly. Energy readings spiked beyond the measurement capabilities of human instruments. The Council comes to claim what they believe is theirs, the predecessor said, its voice now carrying undertones of anticipation. This presents us with a perfect opportunity to demonstrate the futility of their position. Admiral Rodriguez, you have a choice to make. Rodriguez looked at the tactical display, showing the approaching Council fleet, then at the sabotage network controls that could cripple galactic civilization, then at the alien entity offering humanity dominion over their former oppressors. Choose quickly, the predecessor urged. Your former allies are powering weapons that could reduce this station to atoms. Will you activate your clever little network and prove humanity's willingness to burn the galaxy rather than submit? Or will you accept our offer and watch as we demonstrate why the Council was right to fear you? The Council fleet was moving into attack formation. The predecessor vessels were building energy for something that would rewrite the laws of physics. And somewhere in the middle of it all, humanity's future hung in the balance of one man's decision. Chin realized she was holding her breath again as Rodriguez reached for both control panels simultaneously. No, he said, pulling his hands back and straightening to his full height. I choose option 3. The predecessor's bioluminescent veins pulsed brighter, betraying what might have been surprise. There is no option 3, Admiral. You must choose between submission and alliance. Rodriguez smiled with the confidence of a man who had spent 40 years turning impossible situations to his advantage. With respect, you're both making the same mistake the Council made. You're assuming humans need permission to rewrite the rules. Chun watched in fascination as her commanding officer turned his back on both the alien entity and the control panels that could reshape galactic civilization. Instead, he walked to a seemingly ordinary wall panel and placed his palm against it. The scanner read his biometrics and responded with a soft chime. Project Prometheus wasn't our only backup plan, Rodriguez said as hidden systems came online throughout the station. We've been preparing for every possible scenario, including this one. The predecessor leaned forward, its ancient eyes narrowing. Impossible. We have observed your species for centuries. We know the extent of your capabilities. You know what we let you see, Rodriguez replied. Just like the Council, you made the mistake of underestimating human paranoia. Did you really think we put all our eggs in one basket? Sean felt the station's artificial gravity fluctuate as massive systems she'd never known existed began drawing power from the reactor core. Through the viewports, she could see the space around them beginning to distort in ways that made her eyes water. Whatever Rodriguez had just activated, it was operating on principles that challenged the fundamental laws of physics. The Council fleet commander's voice crackled over the communication system, tight with barely controlled panic. Unknown vessels, this is Admiral Karath of the Galactic Defense Force. You are in violation of Council space. Withdraw immediately or we will open fire. The predecessor's laugh was like the sound of breaking crystal. Your weapons cannot harm us, child. We mastered the art of war before your species existed. Maybe, Rodriguez said, his fingers dancing across newly revealed controls. But they're not aiming at you. Chin's tactical display exploded with new information as the true scope of human preparation became clear. The sabotage network they'd seeded throughout Council space wasn't just designed to disable technology. It was a massive sensor array feeding real-time intelligence about every ship, every defensive position, every strategic asset in the galaxy directly back to this station. And they weren't the only ones receiving that data. You see, Rodriguez continued, we had a pretty good idea that when the crisis came, everyone would assume humans were the weakest link. The Council wants to use us as expendable shields. You want to use us as convenient weapons. Neither of you bothered to ask what we wanted. The space around the station continued to warp as Project Prometheus reached full activation. Chun could see the predecessor ships responding, their fluid hulls shifting to configurations that suggested they were finally taking the humans seriously. But it was too late. What we wanted, Rodriguez said, was to survive. All of us. Even the Council species who voted to exile us. Even you ancient monsters who think the galaxy is your personal playground. The truth hit Chun like a thunderbolt. The energy distortions, the massive power draw, the impossible physics at work around their station. Rodriguez wasn't activating a weapon. He was opening a doorway. Through the expanding rift in space-time, shapes began to emerge. Ships, but not like anything Chun had ever seen. They moved with the fluid grace of living things, their hulls shifting and adapting to the stresses of transitioning between dimensions. And they were massive, each one easily the size of a Council battleship. Ladies and gentlemen, Rodriguez announced to the stunned silence filling the briefing room, allow me to introduce the real reason the galaxy has been experiencing those mysterious energy signatures. Not invaders from beyond our galaxy, but refugees. The lead ship through the rift transmitted a message that appeared on their screens in flowing script that somehow managed to be readable despite being utterly alien. Chun felt tears she couldn't explain streaming down her face as she processed the words. We are the wanderers, displaced from our home dimension by forces beyond our control. We have searched the void between realities for sanctuary, but found only closed doors and hostile reception. Until now, Rodriguez turned to face the predecessor, his expression serious but not hostile. Your people ruled this galaxy once, but you abandoned it. The Council took over, but they've been slowly strangling it with their fear of change. Both of you see these refugees as either a threat to be destroyed or a resource to be exploited. The Admiral's voice carried the weight of absolute conviction as he delivered the words that would echo through galactic history. Humanity sees them as neighbors who need help. And we've just proven that when humans decide to help someone, we don't ask permission from anyone. The predecessor stared at the refugee fleet emerging from interdimensional space, its ancient mind clearly struggling to process this turn of events. The Council ships had powered down their weapons, their crews too stunned by the revelation to maintain aggressive postures. This changes everything, the creature whispered. Rodriguez nodded. Yes, it does. The question now is whether you're both smart enough to adapt to a galaxy where humans don't follow anyone else's script. Chun watched through the viewports as more refugee ships emerged from the rift, bringing with them technologies and perspectives that would transform everything they thought they knew about existence itself. The vote to exile Earth had indeed burned the rulebook. But instead of destroying the galaxy, humanity had just written a completely new one. The weeks that followed became known throughout the galaxy as the Great Revision. The Wanderer refugees brought technologies that made Council science look primitive and predecessor knowledge seem incomplete. Within days, medical advances that had taken the Council centuries to develop were being shared freely across all species. Energy sources that could power entire star systems without depleting natural resources replaced the carefully rationed allocation systems that had governed galactic civilization for millennia. Chun stood in the same observation deck where she'd watched the Council delegates depart, but now the view was transformed. Wanderer ships worked alongside human vessels and former Council fleets in a massive construction project that spanned the entire system. They were building something unprecedented, a multidimensional gateway that would allow permanent communication and travel between realities. The irony wasn't lost on her. The Council had voted to exile humanity to preserve their perfect order, but that exile had freed humans to make the one choice that would benefit everyone. Without the restrictions of Council oversight, Rodriguez had been able to respond to the refugee crisis with typical human stubbornness. refusing to accept that there wasn't a solution that saved everyone. Dr. Williams appeared beside her, tablet in hand as always, but now displaying readouts that would have been incomprehensible just weeks ago. "The integration protocols are working better than we hoped," she reported. "The Wanderer's dimensional science is filling gaps in our understanding that we didn't even know existed. And the Council species are adapting faster than anyone predicted." Through the viewport, Chun could see an Altarian research vessel docked with a Wanderer ship, their crews working together on projects that combined the best of both civilizations. The same Altarians who had first detected the mysterious energy signatures were now learning to manipulate the fundamental forces that created those readings. "What about the predecessors?" Chun asked. The ancient beings had been strangely quiet since the dimensional rift opened, neither opposing the integration nor actively participating in it. William smiled. "They're learning. It turns out that even beings who ruled the galaxy for millions of years can be surprised by genuine altruism. They're offering to share some of their archived knowledge in exchange for being allowed to study human decision-making processes." Commander Torres joined them at the viewport, looking more relaxed than Chun had seen him in years. The prospect of constant warfare had been replaced by the challenge of protecting a rapidly expanding, multidimensional civilization. But it was the kind of challenge that humans excelled at. "Council's officially withdrawn the Exile order," he reported. "Not that it matters much anymore. Half their member species are requesting human advisors for their integration programs. Turns out that when you need someone to figure out how to make impossible things work, you call humans." Chin thought about the vote that had started everything. 3,742 civilizations deciding that humanity was too dangerous to remain part of their perfect galaxy. Now those same civilizations were learning that human unpredictability wasn't a flaw to be managed. It was an asset to be valued. The communication system chimed with an incoming message from Admiral Rodriguez, who is currently aboard one of the Wanderer flagships helping to coordinate the massive integration effort. His image appeared on the screen, and Chin was struck by how much younger he looked. The weight of carrying humanity's secret preparations for 6 years had lifted from his shoulders. "Captain Chun, I need you and your team to report to Gateway Station Alpha. We've got a new situation developing in the Magellanic Clouds, and the Wanderers think it might be another refugee fleet from a different dimensional layer. Apparently, word is spreading that this reality has become a safe haven for displaced civilizations." Hen felt her pulse quicken with anticipation rather than fear. Each new challenge was an opportunity to prove, once again, that humans didn't just survive impossible circumstances. They turned them into advantages. "Sir," she said, "what are our orders?" Rodriguez's grin was pure human satisfaction. "Same as always, Captain. Go out there and make the impossible work. The galaxy's counting on us to keep being exactly who we are." Chun headed for the shuttle bay. She reflected on the strange journey that had brought them to this point. The Galactic Council had tried to write humanity out of their story, treating them as a problem to be solved rather than a people to be understood. The predecessors had seen them as tools to be used for their own ancient purposes. But in the end, it was humanity's refusal to accept anyone else's definition of their role that had saved everyone. When faced with the choice between submission and dominance, humans had chosen a third option that nobody else had even considered: cooperation on their own terms. The galaxy had voted to exile Earth, so humanity had burned the Rulebook. But instead of using the fire to destroy their enemies, they'd used it to light a beacon that guided lost civilizations home. And in doing so, they proved that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do to your opponents is refuse to become what they expect you to be. The stars beyond the viewport held infinite possibilities now, filled with refugees who had found sanctuary and former enemies who had become allies. It wasn't the galaxy anyone had planned for, but it was exactly the one that humans had made possible. And that, Chin realized as her shuttle launched toward the next impossible mission, was the most human thing of all.